Greetings, everyone, and welcome to We Are ACEDS, streaming live on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. My name is Mike Quartararo. I am the president of ACEDS. Today, we will be joined momentarily by the Chief Executive Officer at Rampiva. Rampiva, of course, is a software company based in Toronto. They are pioneering the automation of tasks related to data management and e-discovery. So we'll get to that in a minute. Of course, you can learn more about Rampiva at rampiva.com. Rampiva is a new affiliate partner of ACEDS, and we're so proud to collaborate with them on any number of initiatives over the coming year. And so we're happy to promote any good news they have to our listeners, the e-discovery community, and chat with them about what's new at Rampiva. Daniel.
Hi, Mike.
Welcome to We Are ACEDS Live. Thanks so much for making time for us. Everyone, Daniel Botno, CEO of Rampiva.
Thank you, Mike. And during the intro, I just wanted to say that I was also dancing to the video that you had. That was that's a nice touch. I like that.
That's how we do it over here. We're always trying to have fun. Daniel, let's start. For those who may not know, let's start with a little bit about you, your background, and what led you to found Rampiva.
Of course. Do you want the short version or the full version of where I'm coming from?
Let's start short, and I'll do follow-up questions as necessary.
Sounds good. That's the wise option. So in the short version, I was doing ethical hacking in Canada for basically trying to break into a bunch of companies, into banks, into media companies, into government agencies, to break into their network, to say that, into casinos and so on. Of course, everything was legal. The company that I was working for was hired by these other companies to test the security of their systems. And we were showing them, well, if somebody malicious was trying to get into your company, these are the doors that they would try to open. And these are the weaknesses that we found in your systems. And that was really challenging because you're being put in front of a lot of these assumptions that our systems are secure, our systems are perfect, and you're almost always going to prove people wrong. There's almost always a way to get in, whether that's breaking into a web server or doing something at the firewall at the network, to more human type of exploit, social engineering, tricking somebody, that making them click on an email or do something and give you access to their network. So that was very exciting. But after a while, after breaking into all of the banks that would hire us and all of the media companies and so on, every year we were just showing them, well, out of the 99 problems that we showed you last year, you fixed 3, but you still have 96 that are still out there. So I was looking for my next challenge, and it was pretty obvious that we know, and I knew all of the weaknesses of how to break into companies. Can we help them proactively to prevent that? And on the other side, after there's a breach, what can we do to help them recover from that? So that's when I switched to more into the forensic investigation type of work, where companies that I was working with had suffered a breach, and my job was to figure out who did the bad thing, what kind of data they stole, what did they modify, and what their exposure was. And obviously that was linked to e-discovery, because there's a lot of these events would trigger, in some cases, litigation, would trigger involvement of insurances, would trigger disclosures to the various government entities that they were required to. So all of the work had to be done with the requirements and with the rigor to be able to produce that data after, and the tools that we were using to process these massive amounts of data are the same tools, or in most of the cases, that are used for e-discovery. So that's how I got into the field.
Okay, and so how does one go? And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, all my friends in sort of the adjacent field of cyber and information security, they always tell me it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And at the end of the day, if someone wants to get in, they're going to get in. And I think that
Right.
you just affirmed that. But that doesn't tell us anything about what led you to found Rampiva. So unpack that for us a little bit. I get the connection. We're certainly adjacent to those areas where you've worked, but tell us a little bit about Rampiva.
Right. So I was working for the discovery tasks at a big four audit company, and in charge of processing vast amount of data for a variety of clients. And what I realized is that like a lot of the time we're doing the same thing. Yes, it's hard things to do, and you have to do them, and they're very valuable, but um, it's hard to get a report out of Nuix when you're processing data. You have to export things to an Excel spreadsheet, do a bunch of pivot tables, extract some data there, and put something together. And that took me an hour or more the first time I did it. And then in the afternoon, we got another batch of data from their client, and they also wanted the same report created. So that was going to be another hour and a half of my time. There were other things where the way we were handling data, the process inside when we were processing, what are we filtering? How are we doing? There were a lot of manual steps. And myself and the people from my team were always busy doing all of this manual work. And I had the feeling that, well, we solved the problem. We banged our heads against the wall, and we realized what the best process is, what are the steps that we need to do. But now it feels like we're just pushing the buttons, and we're not creating new things. We're not providing new value. So this was the inspiration for Rampiva, to build software that enables people to, once they have these processes designed, to capture them in a workflow and then just say, yep, for this type of data, for this client, for this scenario, that's the workflow that we knew that that's what we're going to do, and then we're gonna use that, and it runs, and you're off, hands off. Hands off doesn't mean that you're not monitoring, doesn't mean that you're not QCing. A lot of those can and should be put into the process, but it just frees you up to be creative and add value to other places in the process, in the organization, that otherwise you'd just be stuck in front of a computer waiting for a progress bar to complete, to click next for the next task.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating to me because, I came up kind of old school in the system. I mean, going back to the 90s, we were scanning documents, and then, e-discovery came on the scene, and we were processing and, using different tools to get to always the same results, right? And this notion of automating those tasks in a way that lets the individual do more valuable tasks, provide the consultative, provide the advisory, to be able to do those things just makes people in our industry more valuable. So kudos to you. Listen, it may come as a surprise to some, but we actually do a little bit of research before we do these interviews.
Uh-oh.
Daniel, I was on your website, and there was a statement on your website. I don't remember exactly where, but I was on the website, and there's a statement that says data is the most valuable thing that humans produce. I was wondering if you could unpack that a little bit. What led you, and I don't know if you wrote it or someone in marketing, but um, what does that mean to you? Data is the most valuable thing that humans produce.
Yeah, that's something that I wrote, and something that I believe. So we live in an era right now where the most important things are not the hammer that we're building, or that the tomato that we're growing. Those are necessary things, but the most valuable things that we do are the report that we're writing, the software that we're building, the Zoom conversation that we're having, the webinar that we're attending, the photos and the recording that we're taking, either in a professional scenario or in the personal one, the data that we're analyzing. All of these things, this is where the majority of the value of what we are producing as a civilization today, that's where I believe that that's the majority of the value where it lives. And the the physical things that we do, the car that we're building, the hammer, the tomato, they're all very closely related to the digital data. So in the scenario for the tomato, what's important is not just that you put a seed in the ground and then you put some water. You want to know what's the health of the field. There's drones that are surveying fields and that are taking photos, multispectral, and doing analysis on those. And there's the AI that's involved and correlating with other patterns elsewhere. There's the analysis of all of the weather data. There's and how what will happen in the future. There's the global supply and demand, what's happening in other countries and other places of the world. There's the future of the financial market. All of those have a much bigger impact, and or I would argue the majority of the impact of the value that that tomato will have. So I think the that's why I'm saying that the data is the most important thing that we have. It drives everything in our very much so virtual world today, but it also is the driver for the quality, the efficiency, the everything that we're producing in the physical world as well.
Yeah, and I hadn't really thought about it myself until I read it, and then I said, you know what, this guy's got a point. So I appreciate that, and that's a great segue because Rampiva as a data management platform. Um, I think maybe not everybody knows what Rampiva is and what it does. So let's do a little bit of a deep dive here. I should mention too that we're going to do a little product demo next week, I believe, on the ACEDS webinar channel. So tune in for that, everyone. Um, Tell us about Rampiva. What is it and what does it do specifically?
Sure. So Rampiva is a data automation platform. At the center of Rampiva, we're automating the Nuix processing engine. So we're driving the Nuix processing engine, and I mentioned all of those steps that you would do manually and that I was doing manually when I was working in the service provider field and running these day to day. How do I load my data? With what profile? What files do I exclude? After I run it, do I do date filtering first or deduplication first, or is it the other way around? And there's a reason, and you probably the audience probably knows why and how it should be done. Uh, how are we exporting it? What metadata fields? How are we dealing with exclusions and so on? So all of these things are manual steps that people would normally have to do. Rampiva allows you to capture these in a Rampiva workflow, and then you can have this workflow drive the Nuix engine. You point it at a set of data, and it will go through all of these steps and execute all of these steps with the Nuix engine and produce an output from that data. Now, this is the centerpiece. We're doing things at the left of this where we're making it also easy to bring data into the system. We have a connector with Nuix Enterprise Collection Center where we can collect forensic data from computers and servers. We have our own data upload mechanism where a user can just drag and drop files from their desktop computer, and then it triggers this entire workflow and pushes data through all of those steps that we talked about. Or we have a collector from Microsoft Purview, and again, we can collect that data and put it in the process. And then we also have things at the right of the data processing engine, where once data has been processed and filtered and went through these steps, we can load that data, for example, into Brainspace for analytics and analysis and bring some of the results back and do some tagging. Or we could load it in Nuix Discover or Relativity for, well, you actually have reviewers put eyes on these documents and look at them. But the idea is we can automate the process from the beginning, from when the data is available or needs to be collected through one of these sources until when reviewers are notified that, hey, that batch of data is available for you for review. So somebody could trigger the upload of data on a Saturday at 2 a.m. and then first thing Monday morning, and actually before that, but when your reviewer comes in the office, everything will be ready and everything will be prepared for them to actually look at the data and make the decisions, do the things for which we actually need to have the human expert in front of the document to make the decision.
And I could see this really contributing to not just better outcomes, but more predictable outcomes, right? When
Yeah,
you get different data sets at different times in a project, and you want them processed exactly the same way every time. And that adds not just the defensibility, but like I said, the predictability, the output.
yeah, and you don't necessarily want to do everything the same way every single time. You might have a project which is a financial investigation or something which is a cyber breach, like I mentioned, and you can have specific workflows and things of doing for each of these various types of work that you do. But like you said, inside that, whenever there's an e-discovery project for financial fraud, you will want data processed the same way with exactly all of the same steps. And one of the advantages of having to put this in a workflow is that it actually forces you to say, well, do we have our workflow document and is everybody on board with what are the steps that we need to do? Because Frank is doing things in one way, but Jonathan is doing them differently. And Eve is skipping some steps sometimes because she thinks that they're unnecessary. So uh, having to put them in a workflow actually formalizes that process.
Yeah, no, absolutely appreciate that. With a project management background, consistency. Yeah.
And you can
So,
do things where just a bit on the technical side. For example, when you process uh, 10 million documents, and then there will be some encrypted documents in there as an example. You might say, you know what, we have 15 encrypted documents. We don't think that anybody was hiding information here. It doesn't warrant the fact of trying to decrypt them. So we're not even going to do additional steps. We're just moving on. Or maybe somebody doesn't even notice them. If you can put things in the workflow, you can have things that say, you know what, we're always going to deal with encrypted documents. And we will have a process where we scan everything else in the data that we have, and we'll try to find passwords automatically that maybe were exchanged by email or saved in files or in password banks, and automatically try to apply them here. That's a
mm,
task that maybe might take from half an hour to a couple of hours if a human had to do it. And you wouldn't do it systematically every single time because you might think, well, it's not worth it because there's other things that we need to do. Being able to automate it and just consuming machine time, you're able to have a workflow that's not just more reliable, but also more sophisticated because you can keep adding to it and improving it and adding all of these things that you would want to do, but that your analysts just don't have the time for.
yeah, that's amazing. You mentioned a couple different software platforms that are well known in the industry. Uh, does Rampiva integrate? Does it sit on top of? Are there APIs? How are you moving data from a Rampiva workflow, an automation workflow, into some of these other platforms? I understand it sits on top of Nuix. That's the most common application, I think. But tell us a little bit about integration with other platforms.
Yeah, so Rampiva can be deployed as a standalone, but the most the centerpiece is the automation of the Nuix engine. So Rampiva will drive and control all of the aspects inside the Nuix engine. You can consider it as it sits on top of the Nuix engine from that point of view, and then it can push data in, filter data, and extract data. So in addition to that, we have specific connectors. We have a connector to BrainSpace, Reveal BrainSpace, and as far as I know, we are the only company that has a successful connector to bring data into Reveal BrainSpace, and we leverage the APIs from Nuix, from the Nuix engine to extract that data, and also the APIs from Reveal BrainSpace to bring that data into Reveal. And we do that at with very high efficiencies. When we're building this and we're testing it, we're testing it in the hundreds of millions of documents because we want to make sure that this also works from the case where a lawyer might have just a zip file with 25 PDF files, but also to the case where it's a massive litigation. So that's how we do it with BrainSpace. And then we also can bring data back. Again, we're using the BrainSpace APIs to go inside the BrainSpace data set. That's how it's called in there. Extract whatever is needed, classifiers, metadata, everything else that might be extracted by BrainSpace tagging, and then use the Nuix engine that we sit on top of, again, through the APIs and apply that back or export that in a different way. So we do that with BrainSpace. We have a very similar approach with Nuix Discover, and again, similar approach with Relativity. And with Relativity, because we operate from the outside,
Mhm.
we're not an app deployed inside Relativity. We can control one or several Relativity servers. So there are
Mm.
service providers that have multiple Relativity instances in different jurisdictions. With the same Rampiva deployment, you can control your Nuix, you can control your BrainSpace, and also, in this case, the two Relativity deployments that you might have. And this works with Relativity 1 and Relativity Server. We can both load data into these platforms and do some management surrounding that.
Good to know. Fantastic information for our listeners. So I understand there's a significant product release coming, or maybe it's already passed and we've missed it. But tell us about what's new at Rampiva. What's the latest?
Sure. So the integrations with BrainSpace and the extensions that we did with the Relativity, those are things that we built in 2022, and those
Mm.
are things that we built on top of the Nuix piece, which I think we've really excelled. We've heard from Unitat has a public report where they're showing the improvements of 350% in their throughputs and clearing backlogs in 3 months. We have service providers that's changed from spending 3 hours on processing a small data set to having an analyst just spend 5 minutes. So
Mm.
that's the background that we came from. And then on top of that, we are extending the integration with these platforms. And very recently, in version 7.1 that was released earlier this month, we added around 20 incremental improvements. But on top of that, we also have dedicated operations to call and handle messages sent to third-party APIs. So when I mentioned that we're connecting to BrainSpace with the BrainSpace API and Relativity with the Relativity API, we have coded all of that logic inside Rampiva, and we can do all of those things. But if you have another off-the-shelf application, you can still communicate with it from a Rampiva workflow, but through scripts, and that requires a certain level of complexity. Now in version 7.1, we have dedicated operations to allow you to integrate with other REST APIs. So as an example, you could have, as part of a Rampiva workflow, operations in there that will go and update a ticketing system. So if that's where you're tracking, for example, what's the work that we need to do today, and you track that in ticketing systems, as the Rampiva job progresses, it can go and update that ticketing system with the progress that it made, or to let you know that there's a problem and we need human intervention. Or you can make API calls to an internal billing system to track volumes of data that were processed in the various platforms and automatically know how much you need to charge a specific client or to assign to a specific internal project for those reasons. So that's one of the major things that we added. We have a way to run PowerShell scripts natively inside Rampiva. And we have this concept of parameters where all of the operations that you run is not just like one train where you start the workflow and it goes through everything and doesn't care about what's happening. Each operation can be parameterized that decides what's happening when the operation runs. So for example, the filtering of items or the adding of data, you can have parameters for each of those, but also each operation outputs and sets parameters. And the users can also set parameters, and we have system parameters. So the advantage of being able to run PowerShell scripts inside Rampiva workflows is that natively that we can leverage all of these parameters and really have a workflow that's like an expert system where you would have a person decide, if I see this, what do I do? Do I do something else? Now you can do that even inside the PowerShell scripts. And then
I'm sorry, you mentioned PowerShell scripts, and that just reminds me of Windows and Microsoft. And so I can't help but ask you, everybody's talking about, I don't want to say everybody, but a good chunk of the industry obviously is in the Office 365 environment. What about Microsoft Purview? Are you doing anything there? Should people care about that?
Yeah, we do. And actually, that was the last thing that I was going to mention. That's the thing, the last major thing that we released in version 7.1 is an integration with Microsoft Purview. And for those that don't know exactly what Purview is, it's the new branding of the Microsoft Advanced eDiscovery offering from Microsoft. And it's the mechanism that's recommended to be used when you want to extract data from Office 365, from emails, Teams, and all of the related apps that they have in there. So there's with Microsoft Purview, there's a series of steps that you need to do to extract data. You need to create a case, select data in scope, you add it to a review set, you can filter that review set and then add it to an export set, and then you need to run that export. And when you do the export, it's basically a window on your desktop that's downloading that data. And then once it's downloaded, you'll need to do something with it, process it or upload it to a review platform. And if you started at a 5:30 p.m., you just started the creation of the review set, and it's going to take 45 minutes or an hour for that to be created, and you need to go home or your session is closed, nobody's going to be there to know that they need to take those actions. So what we do is we're automating those steps. Once you selected the data that's interesting and you have that eDiscovery case created, you can point Rampiva at that review set, and Rampiva will take it through those steps of waiting for the review set creation to be complete, running the export in Purview, choosing whether you want to put that to an Azure storage location or if you want to download that locally, running the download, waiting for the download to complete, and then, of course, what we do best, processing that data with Nuix and with all of those steps and workflows that you might already have or that you can create to apply all of the filtering, all of the reporting, and load it to review after you have that.
Sounds like an exciting time to be at Rampiva. Seems like you've got all the bases covered. I want to thank you for joining us today. This has been great, very informative. Before we go, is there anything else that's new, interesting, anything you guys are doing, shows you're going to, that you want to share with our listeners today?
Basically, we're attending most of the Discovery shows. So check out our website, rampiva.com/events, to see where we'll be next. I'm just grateful for having me on this interview and being able to talk to you, and for all of the ACEDS members attending and giving us feedback. So that's great. And hope to see you in person or at an event in the future.
Yeah, looking forward to that. But before we go, where listeners can go to rampiva.com to learn more, and what's the best way to get in touch with Rampiva?
So either our website and use the contact form in there, or just email us at info@rampiva.com.
Fantastic. Everyone, Daniel Boteanu, thank you so much for joining us.
My
If
pleasure.
you
Thank you,
are,
Mike.
oh, a pleasure. If you are interested in our short form video interviews, you can find We Are ACEDS live in your LinkedIn feed, Twitter, Facebook, or check us out on the ACEDS YouTube channel, where you can watch previous interviews and live streams. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And thank you again, Daniel.
Thank you.